Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bob, KF4 IMF. Do you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bob, can you hear me? You're muted. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2. You're muted, Bob.
There you go. Now you can hear me. Yeah, I didn't come tonight. Bob Weiss is running a fever, and I was having coffee with him, so I figured just take the precaution on it.
Hey, Bob, say something again. I think you're working on this end.
Okay, can you hear me now? This is sounds good. Are you going to be able to take the projection screen full screen to the Zoom?
Say that again, Bob.
Are you going to be able to put the projection screen full on the Zoom?
Yes, I will once we get to that point.
Oh, okay, super. Looking good. Sounding good.
Trying to get the squill out of it. Testing 1, 2. Hello. There we go. That's better. Test 1, 2. There we go. All right. I'm going to mute for now and be back in a few minutes.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, everybody hear me okay on Zoom?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, just want to make sure. Last
Yep.
month there was an issue that the volume was low, so I think I fixed it for this month.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, we'll be getting started here in a minute. There's a lot of people standing outside. We're trying to round up in here.
All right, folks, if we want to have a seat, we're going to get started. Actually, you might not want to sit down. We're actually going to be doing a pledge. So. Yeah. All right. We got everybody sitting in here. We're going to get started. Oop, getting too close to the speaker. Sorry about that. That's one. Greetings, everybody. My name is John Knott. I am the president of Orlando Amateur Radio Club, and we're going to get started. We got a few things to go over, but first, if everybody would stand, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
All right, guys, appreciate it. Huh? No, I'm not going to sing today. I don't think anybody wants to hear me sing. So we got some people still joining by Zoom. Let me just go around in the room for the ones that are here. If you'll raise your hand for board members, just to introduce everybody. Vice President and Hamcation General Chairman Michael Colley. Secretary Bob Nacero. Anna and Dean are not here. Anna is our treasurer and Dean is our director. Both of them are not here tonight because of work obligations. James Dool is in the center. I wanted to say hello. He's one of our directors. Ed Thralls. Ed's still here, right? Am I missing Ed? Ed's here. He must put, so went outside for a minute. Frank Burkes, you're online, aren't you? Frank is online on Zoom.
Good evening.
Bob Cumming is one of our directors, and Frank Tagalani. Are you on, Frank? Frank T. I don't see Frank online. Okay. Those are our board of directors. Wanted to say welcome to Ed, although Ed might have stepped outside for a second. Ed is new on the board. He was just appointed to the board this past month. Tony had to step down because of work obligations. He was going to be tied up in the evenings quite a bit for the next couple of months at work and thought it'd be best if he just stepped down. And Ed stepped the position and filling in for Tony for the remainder of Tony's term, which everybody gets reelected at the same time every year. We do our nominations in March and elections in April. So Ed will be on the board through that point and then up for reelection. Any guests? Want to stand up and say hello, and what's your name? And you're still working on your license? Excellent. Anybody else? Sir? All right. Welcome. Anybody else? Welcome. And anybody else before I go? All right, Bob C. How many you have on test session tonight? We had 10 today, 9 successful. Hold on 1 second. Come up here. This one's squealing, I think.
We had out of nine people taking tests tonight, we had 5 new techs, a new extra, and 3 new generals.
Excellent. Congratulations to everybody. And we have quite a few of those guys joined our club tonight. They filled out their application, and we sit there and OERC, so everybody knows, OERC gives out a complimentary membership when somebody passes their test for the first time and they haven't been a member of the club. So most of those individuals all became members tonight, so we welcome them. A lot of them don't realize there's a meeting tonight. It's something that we've got to work on. We're working on air conditioners, guys. ACs are in the back, are going to come on to help keep us cool. So if you hear that, we got to have some airflow in here. All right, in-person meeting schedule. I just want to make sure everybody knows here and also on Zoom that we are going to be meeting here at the Central Florida Fairgrounds now, not at downtown. We lost that position downtown. They changed their hours. They close now at 8 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock. Doesn't work for our meetings and stuff. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that we're here at the fairgrounds now. And this is where we'll be meeting at in this in the craft building, which for those of you guys who are part of Hamcation, know this as the North Hall. Here comes Ed. Ed's walking in now. Ed is our new director on the board. So, all right, something new that was announced in our newsletter. If you are an ARL member or want to become an ARL member, you now can renew your membership or get your membership for ARL through the club. It's still the same amount, but the club does get a commission off of that. So if you are interested in joining, or if you are wanting to renew your membership with ARL, we can take care of that for you here at the club now. And all that information is sent up to ARL. Real quick, I want to just talk about the Huntsville Hamfest. Huntsville, Alabama is coming up August the 21st and 22nd. It is the third largest amateur radio hamfest in the United States. And it is a go. They will be definitely having it. They just had their final meeting with the Von Braun Center. Everything's still good. They expanded out big time here, a lot of social distancing. Of course, they're going to have hand sanitizers and all that stuff involved too. But if you want more information on the Huntsville Hamfest, all you have to do is go to hamfest.org. Easy website to remember. Hamfest.org takes you right to their website. And it's coming again on August the 21st and 22nd. Michael, do you have much you want to talk about on Hamcation? You want me to do that part? Okay. Oop, sorry. Microphone.
Sorry about that, everybody. Multitasking here. First, how many people in here don't know what Hamcation is? I see some new faces. So, all right. So most people do. Hamcation is the second largest amateur radio trade show in the country, and it's actually right here at the fairgrounds in February. One thing I want to do, our committee has been growing. We have added a lot of new committee members. Let me first recognize some of them. First off was Keith Koch, KF4BXT. He's going to be joining James as his assistant. Next up is Jacob Bates, K4LAG. He's going to be assistant with Dean for information technology. Harry Banks, KJ4VQO, is coming in as assistant prize and info booth chairman. Robert Jones, W4RDJ, is going to be a swaps assistant chair. Bob Pollock, KM4IMF, is coming back again as a swaps assistant chair also. Robert Lupo, W7ICI, is going to be joining the awards committee as assistant chair. And Bob Weiss, KJ4ZPH, is going to be helping Julie with transportation assistant. So let me thank all those people that stepped up so far to help. I am still looking for a couple more chairman and assistant chairman positions. The first chairman position will be publications, which will be in charge of creating the on-site flyer, any publications we have. This person needs to also be proficient with computers, Adobe, publisher, programs like that to be able to create it. Our next one's going to be special event station. This person's going to be in charge of setting up and operating our special event station during Hamcation. It will be in the building next door to us here, the bigger building. This position, basically what happens is we get usually a loaner radio from ICOM, Yaesu, Kenwood, whatever, what the newest, latest, greatest radio is. We set it up as a special event station so attendees can come by and operate it. make contacts around the world on it. Our next one's going to be a talk-in chair. This person needs to be familiar with Orlando. Talk-in chair, basically, we have a talk-in frequency that they will operate on, give out information about road closures in the area, I-4 traffic around here, parking situations. A lot of people will call in just to ask, hey, where's the ticket booth? Where's the RV check-in at? You direct them in the right area. Those are the chairman positions I have, and I do have one assistant chairman that I still need for on-site tickets. You would be helping Frank Gergitz with the ticket booths out here, making sure they're manned, training the people how to do it, helping them with how to operate the credit card machines, stuff like that. If anybody's interested, please see me. Also, we need regular volunteers during the show. Starting on Tuesday through Sunday, Hamcation usually has 400 to 500 volunteers. This year is our 75th anniversary, and it is also the ARRL National Convention. So we're expecting it to be a good-sized show, bigger than normal, and we will be needing more volunteers. You can go on the website and just go under volunteer to sign up. Also, in the back of the room on the table to my right-hand side, there's actually descriptions of each volunteer area that needs volunteers. It will tell you what the position is, the qualifications for the position, what you will be doing. This is also going to be put on the website on the volunteer page. So in the future, when you go to the website to sign up, you can click on these and read what each position it needs. One of the biggest things why we started doing this, we'll use logistics, for example. Logistics, you're climbing in and out of the back of a U-Haul and lifting heavy things. I know George here don't want to be lifting 50, 60 pound stuff all day. So that's why we kind of did it. So people know before you sign up what you're volunteering for and what each position needs. Like the ticket booth, you're pretty much going to be sitting all day. Some people can't sit all day, so maybe that's not a position for you. RV, you might be walking a lot. Tailgate, you might be walking a lot. So this is an idea of hopefully people won't sign up for stuff they're not able to do. So just like I said, everything's printed back there. Please take one if you're interested. Soon it will be on the website. I've sent all the information to our webmaster, and he is working on getting it up there. The other thing I had, we will be in Huntsville in a couple weeks, actually. Our booth is, for everybody in the room, it's hard to see, but if you want to put your mouse on it, it's going to be right there where the cursor is. Actually, right behind ICOM is where our booth's going to be. So that's the main entrance. We'll be right across from ARL. Good location. It's actually a new location this year where we're at because of the new floor plan that they were doing this year. But we should get lots of traffic through there. So we'll be there set up Saturday and Sunday, selling tickets, talking about Hamcation. I am also doing a forum up there to talk about Hamcation also on Saturday morning. I think that's it. Any questions? Okay, that's all I had.
All right. Sorry, let me get my list. So now we're at the point that we go around to the clubs to sit there and find out what the clubs are doing. QCWA, if you're a club representative, you'll come up to the microphone. So that way everybody can hear you on Zoom and YouTube also. It'd be greatly appreciated. So QCWA is first and then Lamar's is next. Oh, sorry. There you go.
Oh. I'm Rich with QCW. We are in a great period of transition. We had planned to have our first in-person meeting this next coming up week. However, those of you that know Joe Ayala, K4JGA, Joe is the local chapter president, or at least he was. Joe had a stroke about 10 days ago. He's okay, but it's his second stroke, and Joe's going to be going through rehab. So he elected to pull back from the presidency. So at this point, Les Kramer will take over the presidency. He's the vice president, so he'll do the duties of president. And so, but there's two things going on, and that is that we don't feel that QCWA should have an in-person meeting next week because of, well, COVID for one, but because of all this uncertainty right now with the presidency. So we'll have a Zoom meeting. So I have a big Zoom mailing list. If you don't get an invitation to it and you want it, let me know, Rich Wilson. So just let me know and I'll mail you a Zoom invitation, but they'll be going out the first of the week. And that's going to be on Thursday at 1 p.m. So if you're a QCWA member or even a friend and you get that invitation, please try to attend because we'll be talking about nominations for a new president. So Joe has about 1.5 years left on his term. So we'll go through a little election for that. So it'll be important for you to at least tune in on Zoom and get those announcements. So anyway, we also have a Tuesday night QCWA net, 147.195, 103.5. That's at 7:30 p.m. And all this information will be up there as well. Where it's a real friendly net, very informal. Please check in whether you're a member or not. Come talk and say hello. That's about it. Do you want me? Oh, yeah, that's right. The new name, it used to be just a Chapter 45 QCWA net, but we've renamed that to the Al Lapeter QCWA net, and I think that's very appropriate. So come think about Al. Come check into the net. Did you want me to do Lamar's as well?
You can.
Lamar's meets on the first Thursday of the month. That will be this Thursday. Lamar's Rich, WA3SXX, the president of Lamar's, made an announcement last night and tonight, I believe, on the Seminole VHF Traffic Net that they're going to go ahead and do a Lamar's on Zoom meeting again. And that's based on the COVID situation. So anyway, if you do not get an invitation to that, I believe I already saw mine come out. You can go on the lamars.org website and I'm sure it'll get you a Zoom invitation. So, but anyway, this Thursday, 7:30, Lamar's on Zoom. Ed? No in-person for Lamar's, only Zoom. So they're hoping for just a month of that, but you know, playing it by ear. So that's the way to do it up there, and that's great. Any other questions for those two? That's all I got. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Cert, Mike. Front and center. Please. That's the only way that everybody on Zoom can hear
So
you.
really have to stand up for the microphone. So Orlando Citizens Emergency Response Team, I represent the communications portion, the amateur radio communications portion, usually centered around Orlando, the city of Orlando. We usually have a meeting in person at Orlando's EOC the third Tuesday of the month. COVID shut them down, so we don't have meetings, but we still do our weekly net. That happens Wednesday, 7 o'clock, 14676. Thanks to the Orlando group for allowing us to use your repeater. Somewhat formal, not too formal. If you want to tune in, check us out. here's what the handful of the people check in, and you can ask for more information about it. I guess a nickel tour of what Orlando CERT's about is during an emergency situation, if cell phones go down, landlines go down, Orlando has provided the opportunity for hams to radio in any damage in their neighborhoods. So stick your, if it's calmed down enough to where you can look out the window, look out the door, check out up and down your driveway. You can see trees down, lines down, flooding, radio it in case your phone lines are down. And you can tell the city about it and they can put it on the list to get crews out there to repair it. We don't take 911 calls, but if it's an emergency, you can't phone it in or cell phone it in. We do have the ability of getting that information into the 911 group. So that's what we're about. And that's get to it. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
What's that? When Orlando's EOC says we can. So we're all metered around. They've shut it down. They've shut down all extra meetings. And so we're bound to them. So I keep tabs of them. When they say yes, the word will go out.
Thank you, Mike. Did you have anything new for CERT? I'm sorry, Clarkona CERT? Nothing new? Okay. Let's go to CFRA, Bobbin.
All the people showed up. My name is Bob Nocero, W4KBW, president of the Central Florida Repeater Association. We have a monthly meeting at Perkins at the corner of Forsyth and University on the last Wednesday of the month. We start showing up about 6. Some people get there a little early to make sure the tables are set. And we just have a little rag chew. You have your dinner. At 7 o'clock, we'll have a 5-10 minute meeting. We just have rag chew, nothing big. Then we all go out, pay our bills, and have a good time. Repeater downtown is on 443.075. It's a Colonial and I-4. And the webpage is mycfra.org, which is the only thing is I update is the roster. We've got about 27 paid members, including some life members. Membership, $12 per calendar year from the time you pay. Husband or wife, it's 18 total.
Thank you. I'm sorry, radio scouting. Lost my place. Ken.
Hi, everyone. We have approximately 8,000 scouts already with reservations for our October events. So we'll be doing a weekend event every single Saturday up at Camp Lenoche in Paisley, Florida. It's about 2,000 scouts on each weekend. On a third weekend is Jamboree on the Air. That is the scout version of our field day or your field day. The difference is we have a lot more contacts because we try and process over 2,000 scouts in that thing. So they get 15 minutes apiece to run through, show them how radio works and all the different things. Lake County is going to be generous this quarter. They're actually going to bring out 2 of their MCOM trailers, and we're going to set up in a Rybold, which is a campsite just off of main camp. We're looking at having 800 scouts camping out with the equipment overnight. So it should be very interesting. If you are interested in helping us, we're taking in shifts. We'll need some more radio operators. If you just want to come out and spend a couple hours with the scouts, show them a little bit about Morse code, show them how radio works, or just show them the different things. Tell them about your experiences. Who have you talked to in the lake? Just contact me, kn4mdj@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Rodney, did you have anything for the Shriners?
Yes, I do have. I'm on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I think we made a preliminary announcement a few months ago of the November the 13th. That's been scratched. We had a conflict. So our tailgate is going to be the first Saturday in November, November the 6th. And hope to see a lot of you out there. We hope to have a big event this year. We got a big parking lot. We don't have all the table space in the big pavilion that we had in the old center, but we've got a big parking lot for an old-fashioned tailgate. So come out and join us on the 6th of November. And I'll keep you posted as things come along. Thank you, John. That's all I have.
Rodney, what was the address for the Shriners you're building at? Where's their building again?
You would have to ask. We're on Highway 436, just east of Apopka. It's at Balmy Beach Road, and it's right next to the McDonald's.
Okay,
It's just short of the Seminole County line. One traffic light away is Orange County.
okay, November the 6th, correct?
November the 6th, right?
In
Thank
case
you.
in case you didn't hear what Rodney said, the Shriners is going to have a tailgate on November the 6th. It's at the Shriners location that's on 436, next to McDonald's by the Orange. Actually, it's more like the Apopka city limit line and on 436. So if you're interested, he'll have more information coming up. And I think he said it was free, if I'm not mistaken.
No, we'll have our usual fees.
Is there a fee for it?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be the same as it has been, which is, I think, $5 and $7 for sellers.
Okay.
So that's it. And we'll have door prizes, the usual fun.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
Rod.
you, John.
It's the old, I think it's the old Quincy's restaurant that was up there. Yes, up that way. All right. Weakness signal. George, do you have anything?
We're still looking for people to get on 436 sideband. If you have restrictions where you live, that's a good band to get on. And the times for the scheduled times to get on are actually being in the newsletter. Gives the frequencies and the times. So I know you're not writing things down here. So just check with the newsletter and you can get that information. And is anyone going to report on Ham Mesh tonight?
On the BeshNet?
Yes.
Not tonight.
Not tonight. Okay. I don't know if many of you are on microwave, but we're having a little of a phenomena with the sunspot activity and the weather. And just to give you an update, if you're interested in 5 gigahertz, when a lot of the other microwave frequencies are not working well, 5 gigahertz is working exceptionally well. That's about all I have. The beacons, they're all on except 2 gigs. We're 6 meters through 24 gigs.
Thank you. Was Dean on tonight, Mike? Did he remotely come in? Dean? I didn't see him on the list. Okay. All right. AMSAT, anything? Do we have updates? Nothing? Okay. Lara? Lake Amateur Radio? Seminole Aries? Osceola Aries, just checking. I can tell you Orange County Aries meets this coming Monday night at the Orange County Emergency Operations Center at 7 o'clock. I haven't been told we couldn't go back there yet for this next month's meeting. But if there's any changes, I'll make sure I get that out to you guys on email. Real quick, I'm just going to go around to the board. The board members are here. Michael, did you have anything else? No. Bobbin? Bob C? Ed? James? Good. Frank G?
Nothing tonight.
All right. And Frank T didn't come in, did he? Haven't seen him on there. And I don't think Dean is on there either. All right, so one last reminder, we're going to do our quick break. We're going to take about 10 minutes. So we'll come back about 8:15 for our presentation. Our presentation is going to be Stuart Smolkin, WA5EYI from the Asheville Radio Museum is going to do a presentation on their museum. And then we'll have our door prizes afterwards. I will want to just two quick announcements. Membership, just in case if anybody's changed their email addresses or any type of changes, please let us know so that way we have your updated information. We send out the newsletter every month. We always seem to get a couple of them that bounce back because people's emails have changed and they haven't let us know about it. And the other thing is I'll tell you what next month's meeting is going to be September the 1st here at the fairgrounds. And it's going to be Tim Duffy, K3LR. If you don't know who Tim Duffy is, he's the COO of DX Engineering. He's going to do a presentation on grounding and bonding. So that should be a pretty good presentation for next month. So we'll take 15 or 10 minutes. Go on to grab your refreshments, and then we'll come back and Stuart will do the presentation on the Asheville Radio Museum.
Yeah. Okay, I'm testing YouTube. Does anybody hear me on YouTube? Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When I was logged into YouTube, I could hear it. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is for anybody on YouTube. If you just tell me in the chat on YouTube if you hear me or not. All right, testing again. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, testing YouTube again. Teresa, you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll take a second to come through.
All right, we're going to get started. That way Stuart has time to do his presentation. All right, one more thing, two more things I want to mention before Stuart starts. If you are a member of the Dayton Amateur Radio Club, DARA, up in Dayton, Ohio, just so you know, they canceled their meeting this month. They have been meeting at their fairgrounds. Their fair is running this week, so they can't meet at the fairgrounds. The normal facility that they meet at, which is a Kettering Center, is not available yet because of COVID. So they went ahead and decided to cancel their meeting for this month. So if you are a member and did not get that message, it went out today. Their meeting would normally be Friday night. So just letting you know. The other thing I want to mention real quick, and I should have mentioned this earlier and I forgot. If you didn't read about it, And if you haven't heard about it, if you haven't seen it on advertised a lot lately, you must not be paying attention to amateur radio news. If you haven't heard, HRO is opening a store here in the Orlando metropolitan area, also known as Winter Springs. Okay, their projected date is this year. It could be as early as October, November time period. We don't know yet. They haven't really announced exactly when they're going to open. They have some projections, but they're not 100% sure. But the nice thing about it is we're going to have a candy store back in Orlando again. And I guarantee you that that is going to be a popular place on Saturday mornings. Everybody's going to go out there and hang out at the candy store because we haven't had one since 2016. Was that when AES closed, I believe? So it's going to be nice to have a ham radio candy store back in the area again. If you watch their social media or their YouTube channel, they've been putting out announcements. They've been kind of leading us on where it's going to be. Actually, if you had paid attention to the QSC the past couple of months, it was in their advertising that said Winter Springs, Florida, coming soon, but nobody caught that. So, but anyways, stay tuned for more information on that. It's going to be nice to have a ham radio store locally again. I would imagine that there will be advertising for openings here soon to start filling positions. So anybody that's interested in maybe getting into making some money and playing ham radio at the same time might be an opportunity for you. All right, let me go to Stuart. Stuart is online.
I am indeed.
There he is. Try and bring you up on the screen level here. There we go. Stuart, WA5EYI from the Asheville Radio Museum is going to do our presentation this evening. Are you able to hear us here locally?
I can. You're coming through fine. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, and we can turn the volume up a little more too if we need to. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Stuart, and I'm the current curator of the Asheville Radio Museum. I'm delighted to be with you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I gave this presentation to a club up in Boston last night, and they thoroughly enjoyed it, but it ran an hour, and I know we want to get through things a little bit more quickly here this evening. So I may sound a little bit rushed as I go through this, but at the end, I'll be glad to answer any questions about anything that I had to skip over or add a few stories that you'll find interesting. But anyway, we'll try to wrap this up in 45 minutes or less, and you can ask questions along the way if you like, or you can hold your questions to the end, whatever you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to switch over to my presentation and just confirm you guys are seeing it.
Hey, Stuart, if we do run longer, it's okay. We're pressed not too much for time here, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I prefer to have it run just a little bit long because the stories are, I think, the interesting part of the presentation, not just the slides, but okay. You can hurry me along if we need to be.
All right.
Hopefully you're seeing a picture now of the Asheville Radio Museum. Are you seeing that on your screens?
Sorry, I had my microphone muted. Yes, we see it.
Okay, good. Let me tell you just a little bit first about how this museum got started, because I think you'll find this somewhat interesting. First of all, the amazing thing is that we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of this museum this summer. It's amazing to think it was started that long ago and has survived all these years with just a few motivated volunteers along the way. But anyway, that's how long we've been in operation. The way it got started actually is kind of interesting as well. I don't know if any of you folks have ever subscribed to DXing magazine or heard of a fellow named Carl Smith, N4AA. Carl and his wife Miriam were both experienced amateur radio operators. And one day for Carl's birthday, she handed him a 1940s home radio. And he thanked her and she said, "Now, why don't you start a museum?" So he contacted a few other hams in the area that he knew, about 4 or 5 guys, and they got together. And one of them happened to be an instructor at the local community college, which is known as AB Tech, which is Asheville Buncombe Tech. Asheville is the city and Buncombe is the county. And they got together, and one of the guys was an instructor, and he asked the school for permission to use an empty storage room to set up a radio museum. So they said, okay, we'll try it out for a year and see how it goes. And so this is that storage room. And as you can see, over 20 years, it's become quite full of radios. So what I'll try and do this evening is give you a quick virtual tour. We'll look around the museum itself, and I'll show you how it's organized. And then we'll talk about how you can actually do more virtual touring on your own from Orlando. And then I'll explain later, if you'd like to visit us sometime up here in Asheville, how you can go about getting to the museum and making contact with us. So again, I hope you enjoy all this. It'll be part ham radio, part how radio was discovered, and part home radio, but all of it's fascinating to us up here. Except my slide is not advancing. Hang on.
There he goes.
Okay, excuse me, I'll go back to that. What I want to do to start is show you a video that was put together by the public public television here in North Carolina. They have a show that's called North Carolina Weekend. And so this is a video they did on us a year or two ago. And I think this will give you a quick view of what the museum is like and what we try and accomplish.
A radio wave is something we take for granted, and it's not the simplest concept to understand. Thanks to the Asheville Radio Museum, we're taught the wonders of this late 19th century discovery.
A radio wave can actually travel at 186,000 miles per second. Radio wave is enabled the kind of mass communication that allows people in one place and in a far distance.
Dude, is there a way to turn your volume up?
Have a connection.
I'm up as far as I can on my end.
For radio.
Okay.
It simply wasn't possible.
In 1877, Heinrich Hertz, a German scientist, proved that radio waves exist, and it all started with an electrical spark.
In the early days of radio, it was not possible to send music or speech over the radio. All you could do is create sparks. And a spark actually generates a radio wave. So if I turn on this radio here, every time I press the telegraph key, it creates sparks, and the spark is used to send Morse code messages.
In the early 1900s, the triode vacuum tube was invented. This technology was used to send wireless voice and music transmissions, which eventually launched radio broadcasting in the 1920s. Radio suddenly brought people together, sometimes during tragic events.
One of the worst catastrophes in the world. Four or 500 feet into the sky. It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is rising to the ground. Well, the Asheville Radio Museum is both a teaching organization and a repository for various artifacts from the history of radio. We started off with about 20 or 30 radios, and that snowballed. So there's one side that's devoted to the history of amateur radio. This is Whiskey 4, America Foxtrot Mike. And on the other side is the broadcast radio and development of radio and electronics. The museum is located in Asheville Buncombe Technical College, and in particular, we're in the Department of Engineering and Applied Sciences.
I find that the majority of people learn more by putting their hands on it than they do all the theory on the board all day long. Once they do it, then it changes everything.
So Rose, this is our early 1900s Morse code practice machine that people would use to build up their speed. Let's see how it works.
It's safe to say there's something for everyone at the Asheville Radio Museum.
Places like this are important because they help remind kids of history and where we came from. And for me personally, it exposed me to a whole new hobby and area that I didn't really know existed that's perfect for me.
A place to see the kind of history and that has built the technology that we have today. And it's not something that's very easy to see because there aren't very many of these collections in the whole country. I'd say our job here with visitors is to amaze, to fascinate, and to educate. And that's what we attempt to do, whether they like radio or not.
The Asheville Radio Museum is at 315 Elm Building on the campus of Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College. And they're open every Friday from 1 to 3, February through November, and by appointment. For more information, visit their website at avlradiomuseum.org.
So we were very fortunate to get that video made. It was made for a show called Exploring North Carolina that shows all over the state. And it's been wonderful for us because it's a very popular video, actually. They showed it initially and on their program, Exploring North Carolina, but they show it periodically whenever they have a few minutes left over at the end of a show. And it's been wonderful for us because it not only brings us a lot of interested visitors, but it's brought us some incredible donations as well. We had a woman last year whose husband passed away, and he was a radio collector, and she donated her entire collection of his collection of vintage radios, about 4 dozen of them, to the museum. So we're very glad to have this done. We've also been on National Public Radio. They did a wonderful story on us here on Asheville. I'm not going to play it right now in the interest of time, but if you go to our website, and I'll talk about that later, you can listen to that and also see some of the other stories that have been done about the museum. So we are a radio museum, but we're not just an amateur radio museum. We focus on these 4 areas that are shown on our logo. Of course, ham radio is a big part of it because it was started by hams. But we also talk about farm radio and home radio and technology. And I'll get into a little bit more of that as we go through the presentation. But various people have different interests, and we try to cover all of their interests in what we have at the museum. As I mentioned in that brief video, what we try to do is to amaze, to educate, and to fascinate. By amazing, we get people to think about what incredible things radio waves are. So we talk about sound waves traveling about a mile in 5 seconds, but that a radio wave can go almost 1,000,000 miles in that 5 seconds. And we talk about how radio waves can go through the vacuum of space and how they're self-perpetuating. And that really gets people interested to begin with. And then we really try and build some more interest in radio by either giving classes that come through a pop quiz or by doing this verbally with our visitors. But what we do is we ask them to think about how they use radio waves today. And we say, do you use a cell phone? Yes, we do. Do you use a GPS? Well, we do. Do you use Bluetooth? And the list goes on, everything you see on the screen. And then we tell them every single one of these things depends on radio waves. So if they had not been discovered back in the 1800s and developed and made useful, we would not have a lot of these modern conveniences. So when we lay this foundation, this is what usually gets people interested in going through the museum. And a number of the people that come to the museum have what we call a drug problem. And what I mean by that is they're not interested in radios themselves, but their spouse is, and so they're drug along to see the museum. But even for people with this drug problem, they find what we tell them in the way of stories and what we point out and what we show them to be very interesting. And as a result, we end up with a lot of 5-star reviews. Almost every review we get is a 5-star review, and we're very proud of that. So the way we've organized the museum is into 3 separate sections, and I'll show you some photos of these in a minute. But one is the amateur radio collection, which spans almost an entire wall of our small museum. And then the other wall is divided into 2 pieces. One is where we teach about how radio was discovered and developed. And then the other is focusing on home radio. So on the ham radio wall, I'm going to go through these pictures fairly quickly. We find that the hams that visit the museum want to do one of 2 things. They either want to find the equipment that they had at one time and the memories that brings back, or they want to see the equipment they never could afford and drooled over, but they never could afford. So normally we just let the hams walk through and have a look at what's on this wall. But I'll point out a few things that are of some interest. It's hard to move a mouse in Zoom, but I'll do my best. This little item here was donated. It was built back in the, I think around 1930, 1940, thereabouts, but it helped sustain a love relationship. In Hendersonville near Asheville, there were a young man and a young woman, and the young man was going off to college, and they had a ham who was a friend. And so he taught them how to get their ham licenses, and he taught them Morse code. And then he helped them build the equipment like you see here, so they could communicate with each other once the guy was off at college. Some other things that might be of interest to you. This equipment here was donated about a year ago. There's a guy named Rick Rogers, an experienced amateur radio operator in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he wanted to find out what it was like if you were somewhat poor back in the 30s or early 40s and you were an amateur radio operator. So he went to a 1947 QST magazine and found a plan for a 4-tube regenerative radio receiver. And he also found a plan for a 2-tube 10-watt transmitter. And he built those to see what it was like and practice for a while. And this is the one, and this is the other. And he donated them to the museum last year. So we're very happy to have these in our collection. A few other shots of some of the stuff that's in the museum. There's Hallicrafters equipment, there's Hammerland equipment. You guys might not know it, but most of the Hammerland equipment was actually built near Asheville. There's a town about 15 miles north of here called Mars Hill, North Carolina, and that's where Hammerland had its major plant. So let's see, something I want to show you about in that regard. If you look over here and you see these two radios that look similar, this one here is the factory prototype. When they were designing this radio, this was the one that they were building at the Hammerland plant. And then once it was finished and went to production, that's what it became. And so we are very fortunate to get this radio as well. Some other things you see in these pictures are not amateur radio, but we do have scanners on display. Some people like to bring back the memories of those. We have CB radios on display. We've got Smokey and the Bandits picture in there as well. This radio here in the lower left-hand corner is actually one of the first police radios that came out in the 1930s. And we'll take a big look at a bigger picture later, but this thing was so big, it actually had to be bolted into the trunk of the car. Lastly, this is kind of a mixture of equipment, but this is the Collins S-line here from the 1960s. I don't know if any of you guys ever had an S-line back then. I was in high school at the time, and that was certainly the rig I drooled over. I was dating a girl whose father was a doctor, and the doctors were about the only ones who could afford the Collins S-line. But her father would come home at night after 12 hours as a doctor, eat by himself because the family had already eaten. He'd take a shower, put on his bathrobe, and sit down on this ham station and unwind for the day. The radio in front of it is, hopefully some of you guys have seen these things. I'm hoping some of you are vintage radio collectors or restorers, or at least have an interest in them. But this is a 1924 Atwater Kent breadboard radio. It's called a breadboard radio because it was just built on a board that looked like the breadboard that women used in their kitchens. And we'll talk a little bit more about that radio later. Mentioned the second section is on radio discovery and development. And so we'll go through some of this equipment a little bit later in more detail, but just to point things out, there's the spark transmitter back here that you saw in the video. This is a Morse code recorder from the early 1900s. This is a replica of Marconi's Coherer receiver, and we'll take a look at all these a little bit more closely later in the presentation. But part of what's fun at the museum is to get people thinking about how radio could be discovered and developed back in the 1800s. You can't see a radio wave, you can't feel a radio wave unless you touch your antenna and get shocked, of course. But most people cannot see or feel or hear a radio wave going through the air. So the idea that a mathematician in the 1800s could theorize it, and then a German scientist could prove radio waves existed about 20 years later, and then a young Italian guy could actually prove that radio waves could be useful. We go through those stories and people find those fascinating as well. We are a teaching museum. We're not just a place where people walk in and look at the beautiful radios and read the descriptions. What we try and do is teach people and the students at the school about radio as well. So some of what you see here is both for education and entertainment. You see all the Morse code keys we have there because people of all ages seem to enjoy being able to spell their name in Morse code. So in the center of the table, a little hard to see, but we've got the Morse code chart, and they will spell out their names, and you can see the smiles on their faces when they succeed in spelling their names in Morse code. So that's a lot of fun. The purpose for the tuning forks here is that we use them to explain the concept of resonance and how the tuning system in a radio works to tune in a particular station and reject all other stations. And then the young children that visit like to play with this. This is a electric generator out of an old wall phone, and this is the light bulb here. And so they can turn the crank and generate electricity. And what we use that for is to help people understand the relationship between electricity and magnetism. And we use that to explain how a radio wave can be self-perpetuating, because it's not a single wave, it's a magnetic wave and electric wave, and they reinforce each other and rebuild each other as they travel through the vacuum of space. So that's a lot of fun as well. Home radio over the years, this is actually kind of my passion. I was an amateur radio operator back when I was a teenager, at least when I was a young teenager. About midway through my teenage years, I discovered girls and sold my ham equipment to get money for dates. But anyway, I came back to ham radio when I moved up here to Asheville, and also got very, very interested in vintage radio. And so part of the presentation is on vintage radio. So we'll take a look at a few of the items, but as you can see, we are stacked to the ceilings with vintage radios. We have we have crystal radios and all other types of radios along the way. So there are TRF radios. There are TRF radios with Nutridyne, and there are reflex radios that use the same two tubes for RF amplification and audio amplification, and of course superhet. And we go a little bit further than that, but we enjoy showing these to people. And in particular, and we'll get into this later, we enjoy talking about the fact that a lot of radios in the early 1920s were battery operated, and how somewhat complex it was to listen to a radio back then because of everything you had to do to set up a battery operated radio. So lots of fun talking about that as well. Okay, virtual visits to the museum. We hope that some of you guys can make it up here from Orlando. With Allegiant Airlines, there are some very inexpensive tickets available now. But if you're not able to come here for whatever reason, there's other ways you can see our museum. So we'll talk about each of these three fairly quickly, but we've got a very extensive website, which is called AVL, radiomuseum.org. The AVL is the airport abbreviation for Asheville. So you can either remember avlradiomuseum.org or simply get into Google and Google Asheville Radio Museum, or get on Facebook and look for Asheville Radio Museum. But you'll find this very, very easily. And it's a pretty rich website. We'll take a look at a few things in a minute. But the second way you can do it is if you have a smartphone. We actually have a smartphone tour available, and I'll show you how to use it in just a minute. But you can download the application and then tell the application you want to do a virtual tour of the Asheville Radio Museum. And there's about 24 objects in the museum, many of which you'll see tonight. But you can see a picture of the object and get a brief description of it. And then lastly, there's just a whole bunch of video and audio and written stories about the Radio Museum at this point. And all of the links to these things are at the top of our website, and we'll show you how to get to those in a second. So this is just a screen capture of the very top of our homepage. What you can see is we have free admission to everybody. We welcome STEM students and really delight in having them come. And then below you can see there are links to the various tours that you can see if you're on the website. And also you can download a copy of the museum flyer if you like. And then lastly, there's a link to get the virtual tour instructions on the smartphone. So the website is divided into sections. So this would be a little bit further down the home page, and you can choose what's of interest to you. So you can either go to how radio was discovered and developed, or the ham section, or the vintage radio section. And each of them has a fair amount of detail on that particular subject. There's also a links page that has a lot of useful links, especially for vintage radio restoration stuff. We also like to talk a lot on our website about farmers and radio. I imagine you got farmers around Orlando, not in the city proper, but at least somewhere in Florida. And we certainly had a lot of farming going on in rural North Carolina back when radio first came out in the 1920s. So this is just a screen capture of one article on radio in the 1920s. And we have about a dozen old newspaper articles that are out there. But just look at the headline or the first paragraph of this thing, because it's kind of amazing to think about that in the 1920s, there were 32 million people that lived on farms, and it was almost a third of the population of the United States. And so most of these farms are very isolated. A lot of them did not have telephone service yet. The news was probably late in coming. So when radio came out, it had a tremendous impact. The people with radios could now get weather reports far enough in advance that if a storm were moving in, they could try and harvest their crop before it was destroyed. And they could also get daily pricing reports. So if they live near a train railhead, they can try and bring their crops or livestock to market when the prices were highest. And then also the U.S. Department of Agriculture realized that it could really help farmers across the country by creating what I'll call a college for farmers on the radio. So they started broadcasting radio programs every week on various topics useful to farmers. So they could teach farmers how to increase their crop yields with better fertilizer or more fertilizer. They could teach how to prevent animals from getting sick or how to treat sick animals. So this was a big boon to farmers. And we'll talk about what farmers could afford a little bit later in the presentation, because radios were pretty expensive back then. In the section on how radio waves were discovered and developed, we start with James Maxwell and how he theorized the existence of these waves. Then we go on to Heinrich Hertz, the German scientist, and how he proved they existed. We actually have a little mock-up in the museums where we can demonstrate how Hertz proved that radio waves existed by having his assistant generate a big spark, and he walked around his laboratory with a small loop of wire with a small gap at the top. And if he's in the right place, the right time, and the gap was just the right size, when his assistant generated a big spark, he got a tiny spark. And being a scientist, he ruled out all other possibilities and said, this must be that wave that the mathematician Maxwell had theorized. And I won't bore you with the rest of this, but we go into Marconi, and there are very interesting stories about Marconi and how he proved radio waves could actually be useful, and how he went to England, and how he met the Queen, and how she got excited about what he was doing, and how he got investors and eventually proved that he could send radio waves across the Atlantic. And again, these stories fascinate people as well. One thing that you might find interesting on the website is we have a photo album of pictures taken in the early 1900s of amateur radio stations. And I think there's a dozen or so different photographs in this album, and you can see them on our website as a rolling slideshow. And it's really interesting, in my opinion, to look back at some of these shacks and see the equipment that people were using back then. So for example, I think you can see it here. It's in one of these pictures, but using a rotary spark gap transmitter, a rotary spark gap for his Morse code. We also have on the website a slideshow that we call the beauty of radio equipment. We have a lot of women that visit the museum often that are brought along by someone else, or they're bringing their children to learn about radios. And the first thing they notice is how beautiful the old radio equipment actually is. And so on display, we've got many of the different types of styles of radio cabinets that were used in the 1920s and 30s. And so we have the so-called cathedral radio, and the tombstone radio, and the coffin radio. And people get a kick out of those names, but beyond that, they just really admire how beautiful the early radios were. And so there's a slideshow on our website that shows many of these. There's also a slideshow of vintage radio dials, because as the radio makers got more sophisticated and made beautiful cabinets, they also tried to make beautiful dials a feature of their old radios. And so you'll see a dozen or so of these old radio dials. And this is also a slideshow on the website. The virtual smartphone tour, the instructions are on the website, but essentially there's a free application you can download that's called Uniguide. And once you have that application downloaded, you can choose the city that you want to look at. You can choose Asheville, and it will bring up a list of the virtual tours that are available in Asheville. So on this list of tours, this one is the Asheville Radio Museum. And once you select this tour, you'll get a list of about 24 different items that you can click on to see the photo and get the audio description of that item. So let's move quickly into some interesting things to see at the museum. And again, I'll try and give you a brief description of some of these, but if anyone has any questions later, I'll be glad to go back and fill in the detail for you. You saw a look at this thing earlier. This is the so-called Morse code practice machine. It was made in the very early 1900s. Its name was Omnigraph. The way it worked was you have a clock mechanism here, like an old wind-up clock. And over here, the Morse code is the bumps you see on these discs. So you would move this lever to start this thing working, and this clock motor would start this disc to spinning. And over here, there is an actuator that's kind of like a telegraph key. And so as the bumps hit behind here, it causes the key to operate and is connected to a code practice oscillator so you can hear the Morse code. The interesting thing about this is that this is not a solid cylinder. This is a stack of discs that are each about 1/8 of an inch thick. And so if you were using this to test somebody, they couldn't memorize the disc because you can change the order of the discs and mess with them. This is the Morse code practice machine that was pictured in the earlier photo. Has any of you guys ever seen one of these things? They're quite rare these days, but this actually was used very commonly in the early 1900s. The way it worked, just briefly, this is set up for a wired telegraph. So in the back of this thing, there are two connections for telegraph wires. And if an electrical dot or dash comes in, it activates this electromagnet here. And on this side, there's a pulley that'd be connected to a motor that causes this paper tape to pull through. And so if the electromagnet gets activated, it pulls down this end of a seesaw arm. It pushes this end of the arm against this ink roller and records either a short smudge for a dot or a long smudge for a dash. So if the operator had taken a bathroom break or was out of the room, or code was coming in too fast for them, they could simply pick up the paper tape off the floor at the end of the transmission and do the decoding at their own pace based on the smudges on the paper tape. This particular machine was made in Copenhagen, Denmark, by a company named Evald Andersen, and it's called a Mekanska Etabel in Danish. And that information is on the front here. You can't see it in this picture, but we took that information and we Googled it on the internet. And son of a gun, if Amazon or Google hadn't digitized a very early book called Early Danish Scientific Instruments, and we found the picture of this machine in that book. So pretty fascinating to find that. This is the modern replica of Marconi's receiver when he was trying to prove he could send a signal across the Atlantic Ocean. So he needed something that actually detects the brief dot or the brief dash radio signal. And this is what does it. It's called a coherer. Don't know if any of you ever heard that term before, but I'll explain it in a minute. What you have here is an antenna that pick up the radio signal, and it would go through this tube. The tube has an electrode here, and very tiny metal particles in the middle. And so the radio signal would cause these particles to clump together. And when it did, it completed this circuit, and it would cause a bell to ring. So a short ring would be a dot, and a long ring would be a dash. And the purpose of this wooden rod here is that as the bell clapper is ringing, you need to shake down the wood of the metal particles here with this wooden rod so it can receive the next dot or the next dash. So I think the best you could hope for in Morse code with this thing is about 4 or 5 words per minute, but that's the best they could do in those days. So of course, when Marconi was trying to prove he could send a signal across the Atlantic, all he sent was the letter S, which is dit, dit, dit. So he wasn't too worried about the speed. So there are lots of interesting stories about whether he really sent the S and really heard it, or whether he just convinced the world that he did. But we don't have time to go into those today. But if you get around to it, they're interesting to read. In the English language of the time, clumping together was called cohering. And that's why this tube became known as the coherer. And so this thing actually works. We also built a reproduction spark transmitter. And so when we go out to school classes and such, we show them we are creating radio waves because we get this bell to ring, and people just find that fascinating. This is one photo out of the album that we talked about earlier, which is online on our website. So there's the rotary spark gap that I mentioned earlier, a little bit easier to see in this picture. This is a device that was donated to the museum by a local fellow here. His father back in the 1920s built it. And if any of you guys do any work on the vintage 1920s radios, this appears to be a test rig to test different types of tuning systems. So on this side here, you have the traditional tuning system where you've got the inductor and the variable capacitor. On this side here, you also have a variable capacitor. I'm sorry, it may even be a fixed capacitor, I don't recall. But the way you tuned on this side was you varied the inductance. So you had these 3 coils of wire, and you had these knobs at the top that would move these outer coils inward or outward to vary the inductance. So we were curious about this device right here, and I was able to get a 1924 Montgomery Ward radio catalog. Nothing in this catalog, the only thing in this catalog rather, is radios and radio parts and accessories. And this turns out to be a tuning device that was made by Lee DeForest, made and sold by Lee DeForest, the inventor of the triode vacuum tube back in the early 1920s. And there's a picture of this apparatus in the 1924 catalog. So it was a kick to find the information on this and to have it in the museum. Atwater Kent. I hope you guys have heard of Atwater Kent or know who he is. Some people at Atwater Kent was actually 2 people. But no, it's one person. His first name was Atwater and his last name was Kent. And the way he made his fortune was that his father had a machine shop. And as a young man, his father gave him a room in the machine shop where he could piddle around. So he started making small electrical devices like desktop electric fans. And he made enough money to buy his first car. Well, back in those days, a car might only have 1 cylinder or 2 cylinders or 4 cylinders. But nobody had a good ignition system that would give a good, consistent hot spark at the right time. So Atwater Kent invented it and patented it and made a fortune selling his ignition system to Ford and other car manufacturers. So this is one of those ignition devices that we have in the museum. You can see the patent dates on here are 1904 through 1912. The first radio station started broadcasting in the United States in 1920. So this is well before our commercial radio broadcasting started. But he made his money when radios became popular. He decided to get into the radio manufacturing business. His first year, I think he made about 1,400 radios. By the end of 1920s, he was making and selling more than 1.5 million radios a year. And he had over 12,000 people working for him assembling these radios. So quite the entrepreneur and a very interesting story as well. This is that police radio we looked at earlier. You can see the flanges better in this picture, but it took this big honking piece of equipment for police cars to communicate back then. This is an interesting device. Does anybody recognize this thing or have any idea what it might be? I'll tell you, this is the world's first remote control made for home use. And it was made by Filco in 1939, and it's called the Filco Mystery Remote. And the reason they called it a mystery remote is because it has no wires connecting to their console radio. So the way it works is that if you were to take off the back, you'd see it actually contains a little transmitter inside. And it's powered by a 45-volt battery and then a 1.5-volt battery for the filaments. And so you can use this thing to tune in different stations. And you can also, the tags are missing here, but you could raise or lower the volume. So there's a little motor attached to the volume potentiometer in the console radio. And this thing would send a signal that would cause the motor to either turn one way or the other to change the volume. And notice a couple of things. First of all, notice that the user interface, if I can call it that, is made to look like telephone. And that's because telephones started coming into home use in 1875. So by 1939, people knew pretty well how to operate a telephone dial. And so Filco decided to have this piece of equipment operate the same way, just by dialing it like you would a phone. But also notice that this is in a beautiful mahogany veneer wooden cabinet. This thing is actually about 6 inches across, maybe 8 inches tall, and it's got this dome top to it. But as we discussed earlier, radio manufacturers were trying to make their equipment beautiful as a way of competing, because people wanted to be able to show off this equipment to the neighbors and have it look nice. So another interesting piece of technology from the early days. Anyone recognize this one? Any World War II veterans here tonight? This is a World War II life raft radio. If you were in a B-17 bomber and your plane got shot down over water, you would hope to find this radio in your life raft. And along with the radio would be a metal tube, a waterproof metal tube. And inside would be a coil of wire, a balloon you could inflate, and a helium cylinder. So you'd inflate the helium cylinder, you attach the wire to the balloon, send it up in the air to get an antenna, attach to this thing, and then you turn the crank on the top in order to power it and generate a radio signal so a rescue plane can hopefully find you and rescue you. The shape on this thing is somewhat interesting. This radio actually had a nickname during World War II. Has anybody ever heard of a Gibson girl? Any heads nodding? Gibson girls were the very curvaceous pinup girls in the 1940s that soldiers might carry with them or hang in their locker if they were stationed somewhere. And so this radio has this curvaceous shape, so it became known as the Gibson girl radio. But this shape has a reason. If you were sitting in your life raft, you would put this radio and hold it between your thighs, one on this side, one on this side, so you could hold it in your lap while you're turning the crank. So that's why it's shaped this way. As a sidebar, the older gentleman you saw in the video, his name was Clint Gorman, and he was one of the founders of the Radio Museum. And Clint is 98 years old today and still very active in restoring radios and still does his ham radio work as well. Clint was a B-17 bomber pilot during World War II, and he flew 29 missions and somehow survived. So he's one of my best friends, and it's just amazing to think he made it through World War II after all that combat. So that radio is one that could save your life. This is a radio that could get you killed if you were caught listening to the wrong station during World War II. This is a Nazi propaganda radio. Hitler's propaganda minister, Hermann Goering, ordered that an inexpensive radio be built so that even poor people could have a radio in their houses to listen to Hitler's speeches and Goering's propaganda broadcasts. And so this is that radio. And it has a tuning dial here where you could tune it. But when you got this radio for your home, there was a tag attached to this knob in German. And what the tag said is, think about this. It is a furor order that you only listen to German radio stations. And if you listen to a foreign radio station, it is a crime against the country, and it's punishable by imprisonment at hard labor or death. So they literally could shoot you to death if they caught you listening to the BBC or the Voice of America on this radio. Now, the German police put out the word. They said, we can drive through your neighborhood and we can tell if you're listening to a foreign station. So do you think that's true or not true? It could, I see some head shaking, yes. The answer, it's a yes and no answer. The answer is that this particular radio is not a super heterodyne radio. It used earlier, less expensive technology. So you could not drive by and pick up a signal from this particular radio because it doesn't have a local oscillator inside like a super het radio would. But if somebody had bought themselves a nice radio before the war broke out and the police were driving by with a sniffer, they could in fact detect the local oscillator frequency, and from that they could tell the frequency of the radio station you were listening to. So another interesting story. We get different people come to the museum with different views on this radio, but that's my best understanding of it. This is a better picture of that Atwater Kent breadboard radio that we talked about earlier. This is a Model 12. It's the last breadboard radio that he offered. When he first started making radios, he thought his components were so beautiful that people would want to look at them. And so he could extrude the metal cans that held the variable capacitors. And he also could mold the Bakelite dials and other Bakelite components of this radio. But what he found out was that radios were very expensive back in those days. I think a good radio in the early 1920s could cost $200 at a time when the average worker was making 15 cents an hour. So you had to make a fair amount of money to be able to buy a radio. And we'll talk about crystal radios in a second. But anyway, the people that could afford to buy a radio, as expensive as they were, wanted a showpiece that would look nice in their living room where they could impress the neighbors when they came in. And this looked like a piece of scientific laboratory equipment. The other thing that he discovered was that many people did not have wired power in their houses yet. This is 1924, and the Rural Electrification Act was not passed until the late 1930s. So a lot of people were not experienced with electricity. They thought they could get electrocuted if they touched this thing in the wrong way. So for all these reasons, he stopped making the breadboard radios. And by 1925, he was putting his in a cabinet like everybody else. In my opinion, it's still a very beautiful radio. It's the showpiece that we have in the museum. It's been fully restored. Everything have to come off the breadboard, and then everything polished, lacquered, repainted, and such. But we just had this radio at the WCARS Hamfest last weekend. WCARS is the Western Carolina Amateur Radio Society, and this was the thing that most people really enjoyed seeing. The first radio station that started broadcasting in the United States was station KDKA in Pittsburgh, and they started broadcasting in 1920. Interesting story, and again, stop me if I'm telling too many stories, but I'll tell you the story if we have time. The first time that the U.S. used radio during a war was in World War I. And so after World War I, Westinghouse received a contract from the U.S. government to improve the radio equipment that the military was using. So there's an engineer at Westinghouse who was trying to make a better transmitter, and he was also a ham. So on weekends, he would take his transmitter home to his ham shack in his garage, and just for grins, he'd broadcast radio music. Well, other hams would pick up the music, and they'd contact him and say, "We really liked your broadcast. We hope you'll do more of them." So one day his boss, a vice president of Westinghouse, comes in and he says that. And the vice president says, "Well, gee, maybe if there was more content available on the airwaves, people would buy more of the radios that we sell. And maybe that would lead to more people wanted to open radio stations, and then we could sell them transmitters. And maybe we could also make money by having our own radio station and selling advertising." And so that led Westinghouse to start the station, which is called KDKA in Pittsburgh. And the thing that's so interesting to us is this is a 1923 Westinghouse radio that came out of a closet at station KDKA in Pittsburgh. And the way we got it is there was a gent who worked for KDKA in the 1960s, and they were doing some cleaning out some closets up there. And the guy doing the cleaning found this radio and offered it to him, and he took it. And he later retired to Asheville and found out about our museum and came in and donated it. And so we're very glad to have it. As a sidebar on radio call signs for the commercial stations, back in the 1920s and early days, they were able to request their call signs, and some would do it to match whatever they were. So Sears's call sign in Chicago was WLS. Can anyone think of what that might stand for? It's world's largest store. And then here in Asheville, we got our first radio station in 1927, and that station's call sign is WWNC, which is wonderful Western North Carolina. So I mentioned that we have just a large number of vintage radios that we have restored and have operational in the museum. That's my personal hobby because it's so much fun bringing these old radios back to life. And it doesn't require having an engineering degree or electronics degree. For anyone who's interested who works on vintage radios, I wanted to point this out. We have a very simple power supply system that we created. With the old radios like this, you needed to have a 6-volt power supply for the filaments and a 90-volt power supply for most of the plate tubes. And then you also needed to have a 4.5 power supply to bias the audio tubes to prevent distortion. So for the 6 volts, we just use a regular old 6-volt 2-amp wall wart or power adapter, whatever you guys like to call it. And then we have a 12-volt wall wart that feeds this device that's here for show. Most of them I have hidden on the back of the radios. But this thing is called a buck converter. And you buy these on eBay from China for about $5. And the buck converter takes in the 12 volts and it bucks it up to 90 volts. And that's how we get the plate voltage for most of the tubes. And the last tube is the detector tube, and it normally operates at 22.5 or 45 volts. So we simply put a Zener diode tap on the 90 volts coming out to get a tap off going at 22.5 or 45 volts. And then for the grid bias, the minus 4.5 volts, we just put 3 AA batteries into a battery holder and connect it because it hardly draws any current at all. And there's our power supply. So we can put that together in about 30 minutes, which is a whole lot faster and a whole lot less expensive than the methods that most people use. This one, again, this is for the vintage radio folks and some of you others who have an interest in super heterodyne. I think you'll find this interesting. This radio, first of all, Edwin Armstrong invented super heterodyne in 1918. And so what you're looking at here is a radio, an early super het radio that I believe was sold as a kit in 1924 by a company called Phoenix. It was Phenix. And so this is an 8-tube super het radio. And as you all know, on the modern radios we're all used to, you only have one tuning dial because that one tuning dial is tuning the radio frequency and also tuning the local oscillator through a second capacitor at the same time. Well, in the early radios, they didn't have that. So what you see on here is you have one tuning dial and coil for the tuning the radio station frequency, and then you have a separate capacitor and tuning coil for tuning the local oscillator. And then in the tube, they put the signal from the radio on the grid, and they put the signal from the local oscillator on the plate to combine them. And that's how they made this thing work. So what you're looking at was a basket case when it was donated. The cabinet was cracked. The audio transformers were missing. This oscillator, the RF coil here. I'm sorry, you can't see it very well with my mouse not showing. But anyway, one of the oscillator coils, RF coils had come loose. There's 1,500 feet of spaghetti wire in the corner of the radio. All the binding posts were missing. And we've just finished bringing this radio back to life. And it's receiving nicely. So it'll be on display in a couple of weeks. Another TRF radio. For those of you who are familiar with TRF radios, they usually have 3 tuning dials. And then people complained about having to turn 3 tuning dials. So in this one, you have a single tuning dial in the middle, which actually turns all 3 of the variable capacitors at once. And then if you need to make a very fine adjustment, you can turn this knob or this knob to get a better signal. But another beautiful radio. CBs we talked about, or scanners actually in this picture, CBs we talked about. This radio is interesting because this was an early portable radio before the transistor was invented in mid 1950s. And so what you'll see here in this picture are sub-miniature vacuum tubes. Have you guys ever seen these before? This is a miniature vacuum tube that was used in most of the ham equipment. These are called sub-miniature vacuum tubes. Has anyone heard the story of how these came to be invented and why? These tubes were invented during World War II by the Allies when the Germans were attacking England with their buzz bombs. And what the Allies wanted to have was a proximity detector that was small enough to fit into the head of an artillery shell, so that if they shot up an artillery shell and it got close enough to a buzz bomb in the air, the proximity detector would detect it, the artillery shell would explode and hopefully destroy the buzz bomb in the air before it could land on the ground and do a lot more damage. So in order to do that, they needed very small tubes, and these are examples of the small tubes. These tubes also did not go into a socket like this one did. These tubes just had wires extended out so they could be soldered into the circuit board so vibration could not shake them loose. In the middle 1950s, these tubes, small tubes, started showing up in hearing aids and also in even smaller portable radios. And then in the 1950s, when the transistor came out, then people moved away from this technology. But the story of how they were invented and why, I think, is a very interesting story as well. Last piece of things we're going to look at, just because I think you'll find this interesting. This looks like a record player, but it's not. This is a 1949 thereabouts child's toy, and it's a recorder. So what you see here is not a record, but magnetic media, like a floppy disk from the early personal computers. And so this tone arm here does not have a needle like you would for a record. It's got a magnetic recording head like you would have on a little handheld cassette recorder. And so this plastic device here is actually for tracking. And so there's a spiral groove here, and there's a needle back here that just tracks this thing across the floppy disk media. So this thing here can be used as a microphone or a speaker controlled by the switch. So the child could set the switch to talk, and they could sing in it or talk to it or whatever. And when they were finished, they could move the tone arm back to the start and move this to play and play their voice back. And so inside of here is a little tube, a vacuum tube operated amplifier system. And then you say, well, can they erase this when they're finished? And the answer is yes. This T-shaped object here is a magnet. So you just take the magnet and you rub it across the floppy, you're good to go for your next recording. So a guy came in and donated this a year or two ago, which is part of the fun of being the curator at the Radio Museum, because it's like that Pawn Star show on TV. You never know what's going to walk in the door. Very, very quickly, I wanted to point out two books that if you're not familiar with them, you may find interesting. This book, Thunderstruck, is by Eric Larson. And if your wife is a reader, she'll know who Eric Larson is. He is a historic novelist, so he does extensive research into a topic, and then he writes his novel as a historic novel. And the last 20 or 30 pages in his book will just be all of his footnotes from his research. But this book, Thunderstruck, is the story of Marconi and how Marconi came to do what he did and all the obstacles he faced along the way. And it makes for a very interesting read. My wife read it, she recommended it to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The one I think you guys will really enjoy if you're not familiar with it. Has anybody heard of the Spark Museum in Bellingham, Washington? If you have not, this is something that you will definitely find interesting. It's a museum in Bellingham, Washington. If you do a Google search for Spark Museum, you'll find it. And this is a book of the things they have on display. This museum was started by a guy who made a big fortune in Silicon Valley, and then decided he wanted to create the best museum on the planet of all things electrical and electronic. Now they came to be discovered. So you can buy this book on Amazon as a used book for about $15, including shipping. It's a fairly good sized book. You can't tell in this picture because I had to reduce it down to get it in the frame, but it's about a 10 by 12 inch book. And it's beautifully illustrated on the inside with pictures on that like this throughout the book, divided into different sections. So I highly recommend it. Buy it if you can afford it, or go to the Spark Museum website. Wrapping up, if you ever are able to visit with us in Asheville, as I mentioned, we're in Asheville Buncombe Technical College. Our regular hours are 1 to 3 on Saturdays from February through November. But if you're up here and those times are not convenient for you, you can contact us, and we're generally able to accommodate people at almost any other time, because we love having people visit the museum. We're glad to do it. On the website at the bottom of the homepage, which is very long, at the very bottom, you'll find a form that says contact us. And so you can simply use the contact us form. It generates an email to me, And then I'll respond back through regular email to set up a day and time for you to visit. This is a copy of part of the museum flyer. This is the cover and the inside. And so if you're interested in just looking at this, there's a link at the top of our homepage and you can download this and look at it at home. And if you want to find us, we're on Facebook. You can find us on Yelp. You can find us on TripAdvisor, and you can find us on Asheville's tourism website, which is called Explorer Asheville. So I thank you very much. I appreciate very much you giving me time to tell you a few more stories, and I hope you found some of this interesting. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
All right, we're set up here to take questions in the at the fairgrounds. And Michael, if you want to go back to gallery view, Stuart, if you maybe
yeah,
your screen.
Yep.
Michael, if you go to gallery view, that way, if anybody on the Zoom chat wants to ask any questions, we can go that way also. Does anybody in the room here have any questions? If you do, Michael and I will bring you a microphone and we won't make you stand up in front of the camera again. Although we might turn the camera towards you. So anybody on Zoom or YouTube that have questions?
This is not unusual, by the way. People get very shy at the end of the presentation.
Question. It's coming right there with the microphone.
Okay, I have one question. I have a little collection of my own, and the Atwater Kent. Last time I looked at the value of that, it was quite high. I wonder if you have any idea about what its value is in today's market.
I do, as it turns out, and I can actually recommend some very specific information that's also very accurate. These breadboard radios get sold fairly frequently on eBay. And so if you know how to use eBay or someone can assist you, you can go into eBay and do a search for breadboard radio, and you'll bring up the Atwater Kent breadboard radios that are available for sale. But over in the left-hand column, if you scroll down, you can filter to see just the ones that have actually sold. And that will show you what these radios have actually sold for, not what people are asking for. But when I look at the Atwater Kent breadboards, depending on the model, if you're looking at an Atwater Kent 10 or Atwater Kent 12, one in that range, it's not unusual to see these things, if they're restored and working, sell for $1,000 to $1,500.
Okay, they're a little bit less expensive than some of them I've seen. And I don't know if people are collecting these old farm radios like they used to. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
Also, if you want to take a look at the YouTube to see if anybody asked a question on YouTube, Michael. I know there's a bunch of people there also. Does anybody else in the room have a question? It was a good presentation. I know I like the Asheville, Gatlinburg area. And next time I'm up in the area, I'll try to swing by there.
Well, we hope you will. Like I say, if we're trying to accommodate you, whatever time, whatever day you're here. And I'll thank you guys again for inviting me to make the presentation. We always enjoyed doing this and hope some of it was useful to you.
Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate your time this evening. And also I'll follow up with you on email afterwards.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
I'm not eligible for door prizes, am I?
Yeah, small ones tonight.
Good night, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Yep.
Because I wasn't sure exactly how many people were going to show up tonight. So I thought, well, because of the variant and people might not want to come out to it this evening, we brought a couple of small ones. Again, I just want to remind everybody that next month, Wednesday, September the 1st at 7:30 here at the fairgrounds, our guest speaker will be Tim Duffy, K3LR. He's going to be doing on a presentation on grounding and bonding. For us that live in Florida, grounding is a good thing. So it might be a presentation that you guys might want to really listen to, or maybe we'll all learn something new on that one. Tim won't be here. He'll be coming in by Zoom, but he does a great presentation. If everybody remembers, back in April of this year, Dr. Bob Heil did a presentation for us. Dr. Bob Heil will be back in November to do another presentation. A totally separate new presentation. In fact, he Won't even tell me the name of it yet because he's still developing it. So it's going to be, I'm sure, a good hit presentation. So that'll be in November. December, we don't have a meeting. That is our holiday party that we do at the Knights of Columbus. And we'll start selling those tickets next month here at the meeting. So plus you can get them on, we'll make it easy so you can get them up online or something too. So with that, we'll do our drawings real quick and we'll break down. I will ask if everybody will grab the chair that they're sitting in when they get up and stack them on that stack of chairs there. If you look how they're stacked, they're all going one direction. Don't flip flop them because they end up falling off and they don't lock in place. But if you can grab your chair, those help us out real quick to help tear down real quick. That'd be greatly appreciated. This evening, like I said, I only have a couple of small gifts, door prizes tonight. It's a external speaker, really good external speaker. What amateur radio operator doesn't need a precision screwdriver set? And something we started doing last month. This is a pack of connectors, different connectors that you might need, including some PL259s. But there's like the barrel connectors, double males. There's BNC. There's some pigtails. There's a bunch of different things in there. Great thing to have on hand if you never know when you might need one, especially if you are into emergency operations, emergency communications, and you never know you might need something on the fly. So the first one, and whoever, when we call your number, you just pick the one that you want. That's the way it goes, and last person gets what's left. So, all right, last four digits, 1160. 1160. Mike, have your pick. Thank you, sir. See there, we don't have a grand prize tonight. Okay. All right, next one, 1170. Wow. Huh? There you go. And last but not least tonight, 1165. Wow, 1160, 65, and 70. Precision screwdriver set. Michael?
You're saying there was no grand prize. Those connectors are actually over probably $100.
That's true. Those connectors are about $100 worth of connectors in that bag. So that's something we started gathering together at a couple of ham fests ago prior to the pandemic. Congratulations to Mike. He got his extra tonight also. Congratulations. All right, guys. Appreciate it very much. Sorry we ran late. You guys on YouTube and Zoom, thank you for tuning in with us this evening. We hope to see you back here maybe next month.